All right, thank you all for joining us in this week's Conversations in Agave. We're extremely excited to have Mike Hurley here with us today. And in conversation with him is Mezcalistas co-founder Max Garoni, who some of you may not have seen in a while, but he's definitely been here behind the scenes, writing away, and recently published a big piece about Bacanora for Mezcalistas. So with that, I am going to take myself off video and let these guys go ahead and get started.
All right. Thanks for the introduction, Susan. Yes, as Susan said, I wrote a big piece for Mezcalistas about Bacanora recently. It was based mostly upon my trip to last year's Tucson Agave Heritage Festival, where I met Michael Hurley. Michael and I had chit-chatted a little bit before that, but that trip to Tucson was opportunity for a very deep dive into meeting a number of Bacanora distillers, tasting obviously a number of their products, which was fantastic. And also traveling a fair amount around the border region to see all the agaves that were growing there. It is, if you haven't been, an exquisitely beautiful area. There's a lot going on in Tucson, though, you know, knock on wood that all that comes back after the coronavirus crisis ends. And the thing that impressed me the most of all is that there's this kind of fluid culture that's cross-border. A lot of the people that are really into agave spirits in Tucson travel frequently to Mexico, know a lot of Mexicans, and there's a shared history there. Michael's going to delve into that, but it was a really fascinating contrast to life here in California, where yes, we have a lot of cross-border activity, but the cultural element doesn't seem as shared in the same way. So really quickly, I just want to introduce Michael. He is a longtime scientist, actually, who got into the agave spirits world as a business person relatively recently. This is another act in his life, and it's pretty fascinating. He imports two labels right now, Batuk and Mazot, which he'll talk about. He travels frequently to Bacanora. He knows a ton of people there. He knows the region really well. And obviously his science background gives him like a real deep bench of expertise to talk about all of the key concerns, sustainability and environmentally, especially. He loves to talk about the, like what I started talking about, this cross-border culture. So maybe a sense of my evangelism has come from him. It definitely has, but I've been impressed by that as well. And as you can tell from his presentation, he's a wealth of anecdotes and information. So I'm gonna sit back and I'll jump in here and there if the conversation needs focusing. I'm gonna be reading your questions and comments in the chat. I'll bring them up. If you have them as we're talking, throw them out there. I will collect them either for the end or to spice up the conversation as we go. Michael's got a little presentation that's going to kick us off, and he'll lead us through with a bunch of pictures and a video as well. So I'm going to hand that off to him now, and I'll mute myself in a second. All right, Michael.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Mike Hurley. Worked on a lot of science issues. Started out my career in Arizona on water, if you can believe that, and did a lot of transboundary cultural stuff recently. There was going to be a wallpaper behind here that showed the view right from where I'm looking right now, which is the Sonoran Desert. But since I don't think it's controversial, but I'm sitting in Bacanora country right now. This is Bacanora Tucson's where I discovered Bacanora, not Mexico. It was my brother-in-law's brother. There was always somebody that knows somebody that has some here. And so it's something mysterious. It was illegal, so he'd drive down to Mexico to this rock formation and pick it up near some plants, and then they had a deal where he put the money under the rock and then got it across the border. And everybody has a story here. I was just telling these guys, trying to get one of these small business loans, and my SBA, small business advisor, She says, oh, what do you import? And I go, oh, Bacanora. She says, I know Bacanora. I've got a Bacanora story. And turns out when her husband started courting her after he got enough courage by drinking Bacanora to go up and ask her to dance. So it's kind of it's a big cultural thing here. So I'm going to see if I can figure this out. So I need to go, ooh, dear. There we go. So right now what I do is I represent family producers, traditional producers. You know, I'm a science policy person by trade. You'll see in this presentation, that's how I approach things. The first trip, big Bacanora trip, I went down, I first met all the scientists and all the policy people. And I try to promote more the people and the culture and the history than I do the bottle itself. So I'm going to do, generally, is what I was asked to do. What is Bacanora? And then we've been having this discussion is what is sustainability, what is culture, and what are the issues. We're probably not going to get into that. I think it's going to last a lot longer. But this is a slide I'm working on, kind of a conceptual base on this idea of, is Bacanora a cultural thing? Is Bacanora mezcal? You can put mezcal in there. It's this idea of is it a commodity? Is it just liquid in a bottle? I'm seeing things change rapidly from in both the Bacanora and mezcal world, and or does it have? And that's what I'm attracted to the whole mezcal Bacanora thing is, does it have cultural, intangible qualities, values that are non-economic, but that add something to it? And actually, it's a mixture of both. It's just some are more commodity oriented than others, more cultural oriented. So the key is how, in the concept of transparency and the consumer, how do we get at this? So what a commodity is more generic. You can look at it as tequila or whiskey as the goals. And I just look for processes of commodification as you go through this. And think about these whole things as cultural. And so if we have processes of commodification, then what is culture? Do we have processes of heritage? Do we have a model? How do we do that? And we don't right now, I don't think. So one thing to get at this is to redefine sustainability. And I use the UNESCO model, and a lot of people do. And this is taken from their website. So normally we just look at sustainability as a biological, environmental thing, and it's not. And so there's 4 dimensions to sustainable development, which are intertwined and not separate. There's the environment, which we normally do, biological sustainability, society, which we're getting into as ecosystems, as social ecological systems, including the people and the culture. Culture is a strong thing that is separate. It's different. You can think of the difference between social science and anthropology, and that's why they include culture in there. It's something separate and more powerful. And then economic, you can think of it as social economic sustainability. Where's the money go? You know, how are you developing? And so this is straight from their website. From cultural heritage to culture and creative industries, culture is both an enabler and a driver, very important, of economic, social, and environmental dimension. So think of these 2 things while we go through there, and I'm just developing these ideas. So this is the model, this is the visual model. So this little X in the corner, let's see, there's a cursor. This little X in the corner is where we normally think of sustainability, and that's how we talk about it. But really, sustainability, if you're looking at it from a social point of view, also economic and cultural, it's at this intersection. So you have to include everything if you want to take it from a holistic point of view. So as you go through there, think of the social aspects, think of the cultural aspects, think of the economic aspects. And we just need to start a discussion on this. So the history of Bacanora is, it started around the 1600s when the native Apata that lived in the central part of the Sierras, were interacting with Spanish stills. By the late 19th and early 20th century, there was a small industry going, 130,000 liter production, 500,000 jobs. It doesn't seem like much now, but it was back then. And it was declared illegal in 1915, and they didn't end their prohibition. There was a lot of reasons. There was a couple of reasons. One, they went through the same social cultural things we did leading up to prohibition, but also after the revolution, they wanted to have a vision of Mexico as an upcoming industrial society, not a peasant society. So they rescinded, or it became legal in 1992, but there was no real way to accomplish that until they did the designation of origin in the NOM. The designation of origin was in 2000. The NOM regulations were established in 2005, and they're talking about now, because it was essentially a copy of the tequila NOM. So when I first started out in early 2017, late 2016, there was about 5,000 small distillers registered, and there were 18 commercial brands, about half of which were traditional and the half are what we call commercial or commercial adores. By 2020, now there's over 50 commercial brands, and they're mostly commercial adores. And it's kind of overwhelming the traditional and cultural aspects of Bacanora.
Michael, could you quickly break down, just make that very clear about the difference in commercial adores, what that means in this space?
Yeah, I got to be careful because I get along with everybody. I like everybody. But commercial adores, and it's very stereotyped, they're mainly people that live in the city that have started a brand. They either contract out or lease some land in the DO. And we kind of, comercializadores is the Spanish word for marketers. So they're really more marketers than producers. And they kind of, they do source their Bacanora from the DO, but they're non-transparent. We don't know who makes it. We don't know where it's made, how it's made, or anything like that. And another thing is there's less of a cultural component to this. There's more of a commodity, a component. This is, it reminds me of the whiskey situation. There's a lot of small companies that don't make whiskey, but they mix a really good product. The problem is whiskey doesn't have the cultural aspect of Bacanora Mezcal, that mystique or whatever that is that's going on that's making Mezcal popular. So this is one of the questions: is where are we going with this? If you believe in Bacanora Mezcal as a cultural product, how are we going to sustain that, and how to? So first of all, this little red area is the DO is only in 35 municipalities in the Sierras of Sonora that traditionally made Bacanora. It's the furthest north Mezcal DO, and it's the closest Mezcal DO to the US. And it's Bacanora, what other Mezcal has its own name and its own identity and its own designation of origin? And that's because Bacanora is distinct. It's a separate geological, cultural, it had a separate geographical, cultural, and economic development. We call these SESs, social ecological system. It's different than Oaxaca. It's different than a lot of parts of Mexico, and it's more similar to Arizona. So it also, Bacanora occurs in a shared ecosystem, which is the Greater Sonoran Desert. So that desert doesn't have political boundaries, and So this is a desert, what I consider, a lot of people consider this a Sonoran Desert product. It's a desert mezcal. So one thing about is Max was alluding to, we called this shared region Sonorense, and this is Sonorensis. This is the magazine put out by the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum. This is actually the Santa Cruz River in Mexico. The river doesn't stop at boundaries, it crosses the boundaries, so does the San Pedro. And so this is what I call it, and it's a mouthful, but a cross-border multinational biocultural region. It has shared history, culture, food, environment, and also has really strong cross-border family and community ties. So you can think of Sonorense as the social ecological system of the Sonoran Desert. And also, this is why Bacanora doesn't stop at the DO boundaries, and it doesn't stop at the Mexican border boundaries. It was in Arizona and the US way before there was probably a US boundary in Arizona. And it was actually produced in Tucson from 1890 to 1915 on Congress Street. If anyone's been down on Congress Street downtown, that's the center of the happening place downtown. So it has multiple, I think, many more than 100 years of Arizona history and heritage, and it continues today. I mean, I'll go to bars, I'm talking to someone behind the bar, and we're talking about Bacanora, and they'll go, oh yeah, I just went to a wedding, or I just went to a funeral. That's the first time I've had Bacanora. So it's used in all these, it's still used in celebratory things today. And there's probably about tens of thousands of liters of Bacanora in southern Arizona and Coke bottles and other. So I guess this is kind of redundant, but it's a agave distillate with its own developmental history. And I want to get at it's a true cross-border cultural spirit, and it's actually more of a cross-border cultural phenomenon. And culture Bacanora is more than liquid in a bottle. And so this is getting at Max's idea, because I just live here. That's why I live here, because it's this place-based, I guess you could call it, trying to answer Max's queries as, it's just where we are. I mean, we are in the Sonoran Desert. We are in the border. Everyone I know when I grew up in Seattle, everyone went to Alaska to fish. Here, everybody goes and wanders around Mexico. But Tucson's really unique in that it's adapted this whole idea of place-based Sonorense, and it's all in our art, landscaping, food. Tucson's designated as a UNESCO City of Gastronomy. It's everywhere. It's especially in landscaping. I didn't get any satols. We have a lot of satol desert spoons out here. They're like weeds, and they're in the highway medians. And I threw this in because this is a cross-border critter, the Mexican jaguar, just to get that cross-border area. You can't get away from the cross-border issues here in Tucson. And also what this is, cross-border family and community ties. All my producers and most people I know, they have family in Arizona. And what's great about that is they're up here all the time. They know Arizona. And so we're able to go around to all the bars and liquor stores and introduce them to the employees and the owners and the managers. And so it gives a more personal aspect to it. Let me introduce these people too. Normally, on the left are the people that make Mazote, obviously. Amelia Ezra Becerra is the woman on the left. She's the owner, and she runs the whole thing. Manuel Chacon is her husband. He's the former mayor, regional doctor, and he's kind of the historian, storyteller, agave planter. And that's Sinoe Chacon, and he's one of the distillers. Manuel isn't there. On the right is Rafael Encinas Molina, he makes Batuque. That's his son, Sebastian. He has another son, Rafael Jr., that does all the graphics, and he did the graphics in this presentation. So now we're back in, I just want to give you a really quick tour of Sonora and Bacanora country. And so this is on the road to Bacanora, and it's a wicked road. I mean, you're going to burn some rubber off your tires at 25 miles an hour. So, and this is actually, this is in Bacanora. This is the ranch for the Chacon families. If people in the know, these are sotol plants or desert spoon plants. We're not going to get into this right now, but we're actually transitioning into making sotol as just to diversify, and they have an abundance of that. So Bacanora too, what's it made from? I mean, everybody's into this. I'm going to get through this really quickly, but officially it's Angustifolia how, which is which is espadine plant. But Angustifolia is probably the largest distribution of agaves in North America. It goes from the Arizona border all the way into Guatemala. There's no way this Angustifolia it has 50 subspecies by 1980. I don't know how many now. So we look at this as different, and even Gentry in his agaves of Sonora didn't even call it Angustifolia. He just called it Pacifica. He didn't even mention Angustifolia. So there's two subspecies we call it, Pacifica and Yaquiana. We consider this a desert species that co-evolved in the Sonoran Desert. And it is a desert. The Sonoran Desert is known for its, one of the identifications is the large cactus. I think these are two different species. And they have, so the saguaros, but then there's the cardones, the organ pipes, the pitayas, and one other, I can't remember, probably others. So then in Bacanora 3, we get into production. So Bacanora was illegal for 77 years, and it wasn't a passive illegality. People were chased. I sit down and talk with federal officials, and they tell me stories when they were kids being chased by the police with their grandparents, with Bacanora in the back of the truck and throwing it off on the sides of the roads and then coming back at night and picking it up later. So you couldn't have a venada. You couldn't have a really well-established still. So you had to have something that was portable and was hidden. So when it was time to make Bacanora, you rolled out it was barrels mainly, you rolled out the barrels, made your Bacanora, then rolled them back into the canyon or in the thicket of bushes. And I like to think of Bacanora as an example of cultural persistence through a long period of persecution. And that tells you what the strength of the cultural aspect of Bacanora is. This is a classic traditional still. This was recently, just ran into this in my second to last trip to Arizona. And this is a great example. This is both three still operation on the side of the road. Off here you have what are the traditional Bacanora fermentation pits called barrancos. And that almost all the commercial producers have gone to food grade plastic or something like that. But now the barrancos are coming back. And this can be, it's usually rock lined or rock and cement lined, and it can be three different ways used. It's either just regular fermentation with water, dry fermentation, which is the classic barranco, and then you add the water afterwards. And I'm wondering if this one is used, there's a plastic food grade thing here in the pit. I'm wondering if they just use that for temperature control, because I've been pushing people to go back to this just because the temperature variations are so extreme. And so this is Miguel, and this is his backyard still in Bacanora, Sonora, and this is how a lot of people You know, they just have home production systems, still using the, this is a guy named Julian. Julian's quite the character in Bacanora also. He actually now has a commercial brand. He's a very good distiller, and this is out of his backyard. And the classic Coca-Cola bottle. And they, and
what's Julian's brand, Michael?
Oh geez, what? 1915, we were wondering what it is, but I don't know where it is. I mean, he doesn't make that much. He only makes 200 to 300 liters a year, and we drink half of that, it seems like. So it's being promoted by two businessmen in Nogales, and they're on Instagram quite a bit, but they're not in the US. And so I don't know what the story.
No, I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew.
Yeah.
For it.
And it's good. And there's two different traditional methods of cooking the agave. One's the Maya, which is kind of rare. The Horno is what I see more often, and it's maybe more traditional, but it may fit more with Oaxacan styles or Southern styles, but it's a wide, shallow pit. And then the Horno is very deep. It's usually rock or brick lined, and it can go up to, 12, 14 feet deep. And sometimes they're bulbous at the bottom. So these are kind of the newer commercial artisanal stills, I guess you say, of the producers. On the left is from Batuque. It's handmade stainless with copper innards. And this is from Mazote. They just migrated from the ranch 5 years ago, and they're building a really nice artisanal but modern facility. And this is mainly copper. And also I want to get at this because one of the cultural characteristics of the Bacanora country and Sonora is ranching. And also one thing Bacanora, ranching is Bacanora, Bacanora is ranching, and ranching is a large part of Sonora's economy. This is carne asada country. You eat carne for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and you're lucky. So we're already through all that. So this is a video. I'll just give you an insight. From those first two conceptual slides, think of the idea of commodity versus a cultural entity, and then think of the complexities of culture, how Bacanora isn't just liquid in a bottle. It's something that's part of the culture. This video was produced by two former mayors of Bacanora. I want to say Laura Boscom, but I don't think that's correct. Laura. And Manuel Chacon, who is one of the Mazote people, one of my producers. So now I have to go, have to get out of this. And I have to go to, where is it? I want to go to Zoom. I'm in Zoom. How do I get to, see if I can minimize this. New share. Here we go. So you're the second group that's seen this.
El Bacanora nace en la Sierra de Sonora. Es la cultura líquida del encuentro entre el alambique español con el mosto del maguey, que los indios ópatas usaban para aligerar su espíritu en ceremonias y festividades. Su historia y arraigo se empezó a forjar hace más de 300 años. Ha sido y es el complemento para la vida después del ganado y la agricultura de subsistencia de los sonorenses originarios, nacidos del mestizaje ópata español. Su cultura y tradición no solo es espíritu, fue alimento, vestido y medicamento. El Bacanora es un espíritu de la sierra, que brota de la tierra desafiante, impone respeto. Se asoció con Tallo, el sol, y Mezza, la luna, para recibir su energía lentamente, con paciencia, sin prisa. Este espíritu viaja por las noches en las alas del murciélago. El Bacanora está dentro de los ciclos cósmicos. Cuando está listo, sale, se eleva y saluda a Tallo y le dice: aquí estoy, transfórmame. En este momento, el hombre lo atrapa al capar la planta. Y aquí empieza el proceso artesanal. Entonces, el hombre convocó a los 4 elementos de la naturaleza. El aire, para colonizarlo con millones de seres vivos. Las bacterias fermentadoras. La tierra como matriz que incuba, protege al espíritu. El agua, cristalina y pura, que brota de la tierra, lo acompaña. Y finalmente llega el fuego y lo libera. Y como todo ser naciente, quiere vivir, expresarse. Y decide ser un líquido. Pero no un líquido cualquiera, porque aprendió a volar. El murciélago y el aire lo enseñaron. Por eso nos invade con su aroma antes de tocarlo. Pero también es fuego, porque sabe que de ahí proviene. El Bacanora es un espíritu silencioso como el venado, que vive y aprendió a esconderse en la sierra. Ahí nació. Es su terreno natural. No pretendan otra cosa. Él no lo va a permitir. El Bacanora es como un genio milenario. Cuando lo liberan de la botella, es tu amigo. Tu consejero, tu ayudante. Enciende tu corazón con su fuego. Te transforma con su aroma. Abrázalo con cuidado. El Bacanora abre puertas, cierra tratos, hace amigos, hace valientes. El Bacanora es un espíritu viviente que nace con la ayuda del hombre. Del hombre rústico, cotidiano, soñador, valiente, que lo ha defendido y lo ha ocultado mientras pasa el enemigo. Allá en la sierra, en los rincones oscuros y sombreados. Solo el humo lo delata, pero es necesario, porque es parte de su esencia. El Bacanora somos nosotros, la historia del sonorense, la tradición. Es la cultura líquida de la sierra.
So how do I get back to the screen here? Am I here?
No, you should just be able to minimize that. There you go. Okay.
I don't know if you want to stop for questions here or.
Nobody's been asking any questions over here in the chat. If you have questions, do ask them over here in the chat and I can bring them up. But yeah, I think, why don't you go ahead with the rest of your presentation now? It'll dig into some of these other issues that are really interesting.
Yeah, I just want to say that this is in development right now, these ideas, and it's a very delicate, this is a very delicate road to go down, a path to go down for me, because I get along with everybody, and I'll go through this if I can get at this. Let's see. Okay, so let's see. Can you guys see this?
Yeah, can you maximize that though so it takes up the whole screen?
It should have just now. Why isn't it? Okay, let me do this. There it does it. So now I want to get into this idea of sustainability, and not just environmental sustainability, although I'll go through that first, but getting at the social, economic, and the idea of cultural aspects of sustainability. So one of the biggest environmental problems is there's an extreme agave shortage right now, and it's from over harvesting and climate, and it's Angustifolia or Pacifica is extremely frost sensitive, and we'll get to that. But also another barrier to sustainability is kind of the rapid growth of the commercial brands, and commercial brands are anybody that has a license to sell in the market. So there's traditional, there's traditional producers and the commercializadores, but they're all commercial brands. And some of the new producers are this isn't a straight black and white thing. So what it does is it compounds the agave shortage, but it also is competing with, in a way, it's competing with the traditional producers. And I know you're having this problem with, I know you're having this problem with Mezcal, and I want to start this conversation. This is not an end. And I think we should address this through the idea of cultural sustainability, social cultural sustainability, and the idea of commodity, the commodity to culture continuum. So there was an extreme freeze in 2011. I was in Tucson in 2011. It killed all the tops of the palm trees here. It really looked like weird dead toothbrushes sticking out of the ground. But it also killed about 60% of the agave, and in some places, all of it. There were commercial producers that went out of business. And this is north of Alamos, south of Alamos. It wasn't that bad in the southern half of the state. So what that's doing now is it's created a natural agave shortage on top of the overharvesting. And there's a lot of import of agave from the south, and because of the, well, I'll get into that later. But these smaller freezes also, like the last 2 years, there's been smaller freezes, and it knocks back growth. And this is accentuated by the rapid rise in competition. So what's the answer? Do you diversify products? Some people are starting to go into satols, palmillas, of what we call them, lechuguillas. Are there other types of products? Do you want to be in 100% angustifolia? And these are the agaves from this year. You can see they're about between 30 to 50%, 60% frozen back. They do come back. It takes a lot to kill the center of the agave growth area because it's wrapped around in leaves. But so couple of my solutions or ideas are, can we get a terrain model for freeze risk? Because cold air is like a river. It just flows. It flows like a river. So it doesn't freeze everywhere. It freezes in the low areas more than it freezes in the high areas if the high areas are steep. And it freezes in the little channel down into the riverbeds, and then it freezes in the riverbeds. So can we get these kind of models that tell people where to grow their agaves? Or can we start selecting strains from the north that are more frost resistant? And SEAD, the federal government, kind of attempted to do that, but they didn't have any conversations with any of the producers. They did it on their own, and they did it through cloning, not seeds, and it was a failure because it was never adapted by any of the producers. And then like what I said before is diversify. So that's probably the biggest environmental problem between the increase in demand and the problems with freeze.
Michael, there's a question from Clayton Check. He is asking, who's planting the agave? And he also asks, can you comment on the interaction effects between agave planting and beef prices?
Agave planting and what prices?
Beef prices. Or is there, do you understand a relationship there? Right,
No,
that's a question.
But that reminds me of a paper I worked on that in Ghana, well, I didn't work on it, but I used it for a publication. But in Ghana, when fishing went down, the price for wild animals in the market went up. So I don't know. That's a good question. It definitely affects the spot market. The prices in the spot market. The prices are going up. Also, that guy I showed you with the agave, I should have told you about that. That was agave planted 18 years ago. He's been planting agave for over 20 years. Wish I could get back and you've met him, Max. He's a cowboy's cowboy. He's a character. He's a friend. And he's probably one of the few people that has sustainable environmental production of agave, biological production. That and probably the Contrerases. But there's also a lot of ranchers that are producing now agaves just for sale.
So and I know Clayton works very closely. He works in Jalisco a lot. So I'm interpolating here a little bit, Clayton, but I'm curious whether, are there large companies moving in who are starting to farm agave? Is it still very much a small landholder process, or what is the structure of the agriculture there? What's that look like?
Well, that's a good question. I skipped over that. And And a lot of the comercializadores are actually doing some agave plantings. I haven't kept track of them for 2 or 3 years. But I'll just give you a story. My original intent was to go in and keep this real small and represent small scale producers, but they couldn't get enough agave to produce enough to even get it across the border. It just wasn't economically feasible. So I went with the larger, this was advice, to go with the people that had the land and the resources that they could become sustainable. The Mazote, so Rafael Encinas of Batuque is pretty much 80–90% sustainable. He rarely has to buy any on the open market. Mazote still has to buy it on the open market, and depending on part of the season, the prices and where it comes from. So a lot of this is being imported from south, way south. And also the other problem that's coming up with, and that'll get into the next slide or two, is with the increase in demand, people are using any agave they can get. So what's happening is close to the border and where I am at now, agave palmeri is very abundant. And so there's actually even tequila people last year that came up close to the border and took out trucks of agave palmeri. And a lot of agave palmeri are now going into the agave production. I think it's in these, it's hard to know because it's a lot of the commercial adores are non-transparent. You don't know who's making it, how they make it, where it's made, or anything like that. So I don't know if that answers the question. And the Mazote people have relationships with the ranches around them that supply it, and they're planting like crazy. So they figure in about, I think it's 4 years, they'll be able to start doing larger harvest on their own land.
There's two other questions, agave related questions, but to dig into here. John Midlinsky is asking, do you think the cows and their biome affect the fermentation, like people say in Michoacan? He says, forgive my ignorance, do people traditionally ferment Bacanora in leather? I don't know if you know this, Michael, but in Oaxaca, there's some traditions to do fermentation in balloon-like cow hides, but is that anything that you know about in Bacanora?
No, it's actually one being imported right now. I was going to import it. It's up on the Chihuahuan border. It's actually a lechuguilla. And yes, that has been used as in animal skins as fermentation tanks here, but it's rare. I mean, it's hard to find now.
What's the brand that's being imported?
You know, you weren't there, but Susan might know him. We had dinner with him in Denver, and he was right. I'm not good with names, so I've had a lot of conversations with him. I drank his mezcal. He's drank my Bacanora. But he has a lot of his specialty is running around and getting these small scale producers. And he's all over the place. So you guys know him.
It would either probably be William Scanlon, or I don't think William was at dinner with us that night. I can't remember who was there.
Was that Ricardo Pico, maybe?
Is that the Conde Ricardo or?
Yes.
No.
No.
Okay.
Or Reed Spear with Cuenta Cuentos.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, look on the market.
I will look it up and report back to the group whenever we find it. So
yeah, one of the first ones I was going to import. There's also lechuguillas. Lechuguillas is northern Mexico's mezcal. I don't know how many species that we've figured out, maybe 12 species. And Agave Bovi Cornuta, I didn't think I'd have enough time, but I was going to put in some stuff on Uva Llama and lechuguillas in here. But he's importing an Agave Bovi Cornuta that's fermented in a cow skin.
So then there's another question from Jarrett Hedrick about, he asks, is there a reason to only source Pacifica and Yakiana and not other agave for production? Is it purely cultural traditional, or how does that work?
Well, that's a good question, because I just bought a good 2-liter. When you saw that traditional, the same trip as that we found that traditional set of 3 stills, stopped in and talked to a guy and bought 2 liters of his Bacanora. But when we got back and tasted it, we figured it was at least 50% Lechuguilla. So traditionally, right now the gnome says 100% Angustifolia. And I think, I'm not sure how that came about. I think Angustifolia is the dominant species, and it was traditionally, that was the main species, but people mixed and matched quite a bit. I know one of my producers, they said they used to throw in Satols, just a few, just for sweetness, just, you know, and there's a lot of, and it depends on the area. Like Huipari in Rio Sonora is known for putting sugar. I mean, sugar is a big no-no right now, and a lot of people are using it to compensate. But Huipari's honest, that's their cultural history, is using sugars. And some people use, is it bufflegrass? No, it's not bufflegrass.
I think, sorry, this is Susan, that it came about with the Angustifolia because when the DO was built, they really just basically took the CRT structure with the tequila DO and just kind of dropped that onto Bacanora. And so you get kind of these things of, you can only use this kind of agave. And it's kind of a legacy of that from what I understand.
It is, although I know there was a lot of ensembles, but also I know that there was a lot of pride in Angustifolia also as being Bacanora. So I think you're right that they did use the gnome and they just decided to do that. There's no way to enforce, right now, there's no way to enforce, and there's no effort to enforce the 100% Angustifolia. And I think people are now going to start, my producers are going to, one of my producers, Mazzotta, is going to try an ensemble. I know Roberto Contreras and out of Rancho Tapua is thinking about doing an ensemble also.
There's an interesting.
Without the gnome, you could have 100% Palmeri, and people call it Bacanora, but it's not. It's Lechuguilla. So there's a good point and a bad point about that.
So then there's
small-scale producers often use whatever they could. Not bufflegrass. God, I can't think of the name of it. It's a grass that looks like an agave, and they'll throw it in there if they don't have enough sugar in their solution.
And then there's one follow-up question is, Andrew Jordan is asking, Sonora isn't part of the Mexican government's Sotol denomination of origin. You mentioned starting Sotol production. He's curious if the intention was to produce it as an uncertified spirit, campaign for an expansion of the DO, or is that going to be something made over in the Sotol DO?
No, in some areas of Sonora, it's traditional, and they call it palmilla. Palmilla serrata. Palmilla is also the name of this grass. Bear grass. Bear grass. Sometimes they'll ferment the bear grass. No, so I have it. I have the first Sonoran Sotol, and it's just under palmilla. And there are people, I was going to go out today and just get pictures in the medians of all the Sotol desert spoons. It's like a weed around here. So it's.
So if you do that, is your intention to do it as an uncertified spirit, or?
Yes, it's a non-certified spirit.
Okay.
But there are people that are thinking that Sotol should be extended over into Sonora just because it's there and it's here.
Mhm. So
And
then,
that's the problem with these political boundaries is because I ran into somebody, because from Culiacan, Sonoita behind a bar, or Culiacan, not Sonoita, Sinaloa, and who swore that her parents were making Bacanora, and they probably, there is angustifolia over there too. So it does. So any other agave questions?
yeah, there are a few more here. One, I mean, you just touched on it. Clayton was also curious about who controls the regulatory apparatus for Bacanora and how that works.
Okay, well, that's the CRSB. I'll just say it's the Consejo de Bacanora. I know them well. They're fairly small. I don't see much regulation. They do more promotion than and I like the guys quite a bit, but they're also as a Mexican government, they do promote the culture, but they're definitely promoting the commerce over the culture. And and so a lot of the traditional producers aren't, traditional commercial producers aren't part of their promotions sometimes.
Okay.
But they're also, they also fund some of the research, and they kind of coordinate, like one of the, this is big mining country, Arizona and Sonora. Grupo Mexico is one of the biggest mining companies in the world, and it's all through that area. So part of their mitigation for mining project is Grupo Mexico is supposed to be growing a lot of agaves. How they're going to do that, what's the quality, where they're going to do it, and how well it works. But they're forming a plan right now. And it's not a bad plan because they divided the DO into zones. And so they're going to collect seeds from one zone, and they'll grow it in that zone, and it can only be sold back to that zone. So they're trying to keep the genetic integrity of the plant. But we'll see how it works because there's a lot of people that have questions about large-scale irrigation of agave. If you're irrigating and pushing that, is the quality there? And there's one person I really like, he's traditional, but he's sprinkler irrigating his agave. He wants to, these agaves are usually 7 to 8 years, and when they start, and it can be 8 to 12 is normal, 8 to 15, up to 20 years old. And so when I saw a video the other day, the agave, the pinas were so big, they were just using, or so small, they were just using one hand to toss them into the mill. So they must have been 3 to 5 year old agaves. And so that's one thing is to look out for is, and a big question I have is quality versus quantity. How you raise the agave is going to determine the quality of your product in the long run.
So there was a question earlier about estimating the proportion of farmed versus wild agave, or can you shed some light on the continuum there? I mean, you just kind of talked through a little bit of that.
That was actually the talk I gave before that I pirated this from and deleted all that stuff from. And one of my questions is, if you're going to do sustainability programs with these people, and you're using a mix of wild and, because we're using all wild Sotol, and these Sotols are up to 50 years old, you need to be able to survey that somehow. So what I want to do is, get a little mini symposium together and how we do these kind of survey. I know how to do it from forestry point of view. Agave is forestry. It's exactly the same concept. But how do you inventory these is a big question. And how you grow them. So I wish I kept those slides in there now, because that's all these questions on, do you grow them in, in irrigated rows? Do you and the one producer with the big angustifolia, he started out growing in clumps and companion plants, different types of trees and plants, which is kind of a semi-wild. And that's the big question. That actually gets down to soil microbes. And I don't know if you guys know mycorrhizae, plant mycorrhizae. They come from companion plants a lot of times, so they can help you absorb nutrients. So a lot of these trees will actually help the agave nutrients and from lower, further down in the soil. So these are all.
If I'm hearing you right, it sounds like this is really an area of investigation. It's really pretty wide open now. But
I think so, but I haven't looked for people actually trying to do it. I mean, how do we there is no good survey out there on agave distribution that I can see. It just comes, the maps you see are usually large scale maps. So it's just wherever somebody saw one. And so we really don't even know the distribution of these things. So it'd be good to get some systematic studies going, but that takes money, and all the money is now going into the world crisis we have now. So I don't know. That's another big question.
And then another related question to that is, Carlos Meyer asks, how much of the agave is coming outside of the DO to the 35 municipalities? And I guess I'll tack on, does all the agave have to be grown within the DO, or is that the legal intention? How does that work too?
Technically, everything, the next slide will get into that, except it's a horrible slide. I just made it. But let me just get at one of the good things about the DO right now. And it's only developed for the rural areas and the rural places that historic in the Sierras that grew and made Bacanora. And so, versus a lot of Mezcal DOs, they're the whole state. So, and all production is supposed to occur within that DO, from growing and harvesting the agave to bottling. So I suppose that the idea was to keep the economy within the DO and in the rural area. So that's one good structure for it. The problem is I know really good people that are growing agave outside the DO, and then their son will come and say, oh, when they get bigger, we'll move them inside the boundary. But that's not gonna happen. And there's no way, I mean, I was talking about, and this was a professor from the University of Sonora, and we're driving around, and there was this big agave field outside of Hermosillo, so they were getting ready. So technically, no, it's not enforced. I don't know if it will be enforced. That comes up with another question. There is a proposal now to change the DO. I focused on the science part, and since it was a copy of the tequila DO, I'm all for that, and I'm talking to one of the scientists on the committee for that, and but there's also a proposal to expand the boundaries, and there's both a political, financial effort for that and a biological reason for it. The biological reason for it was if you have an agave shortage, why not? They were going to expand it just for agave production. And I think there's a lot of pressure from the large scale agriculturalists. And agriculture is a huge in the desert areas. Sonora is one of the biggest agricultural producers. And, most of our tomatoes come from this area, Mexico, for our winter tomatoes. So I think there's that push, but I haven't kept up with the politics of it. But the producers don't want to change the boundaries, and So did I get, I think I was supposed to say something else and I just got off on.
No, no, that's, I mean, on this continuum, Clayton says, he's asking, is the Bacanora, he says, the Bacanora Council has typically been a political prize that is essentially a property of the current ruling party in Sonora. Is that still the case? What party or faction currently controls the council?
This is being recorded. Can you turn off the recording?
Uh,
I like these guys. I get along with them. I can't say some of the, I mean,
you can
It's
always
a-
pass on the, you can pass on the question. So
well, no, I don't see it being, sometimes the director just changed, and that was, I haven't really seen it being controlled by one party or the other. I'll say it's a political organization, and it's a commercial organization, and its primary duties is promoting. And not everybody. There's a lot of who you know and who your friends are and who are the wealthy people in the cities. So I mean, but they're good guys, everybody. They're all great guys. But it is a political organization, but it's an internal politics, I think, more than an external one. If you know what I'm talking about,
there's Shad Pico has two related questions. Oh.
But I'm going to also say I don't really know what the influence of one party or the other is over, because it's a Republican state. That's another thing I didn't mention. It being a ranching community or being heavy ranching, it's more individualistic society than you get down in southern Mexico, which is more collectivist, where you get into Chiapas and Oaxaca. And so being that, there's also a lot of Republicans, PAN supporters. So PAN controls the legislature and and I think the city and the agriculturalist, and I think the rural areas, and the mayor of Hermosillo's the politics are everywhere. So AMLO just pulled a really nasty one and replaced the really good consul general in a very important Mexican consulate in Tucson that worked all over the place with a political guy that just gave the most money from Sonora. And so we're really upset. So anything can happen.
So then Shad Petko has a different question. He said, you mentioned the Opata. He wants to know whether the Yaqui have a tradition of distillation as well.
Yes, and that was one thing. Everybody has a history of distillation. The core of Bacanora came from Opata country. Bacanora was an Opata community. Batuque, which is now drowned under a reservoir, was a pretty strong Opata community. So that core area was Opata. So to say that it's only Opata was, and they don't exist anymore. They've been, there isn't really, the Opata language is almost lost. But yes, the Yaquis and the Mayas and the Tohono O'odham all have traditions of distillation. Also, I'm supposed to be working on a project with a professor in an NGO down in Sonora, working with Yaqui community development, and I was hoping to be the importer there. Bacanora and Lechuguilla. It would be more of a community organization, community social economic development type of program.
So on a related note, Shad also asks, if we refer back to Isabel Mulford, is there any other evidence of distillation in Pimeria Alta in the Tuscan, Tucson, Sonora region?
Oh yeah, there's pits all over all over the ranches in this area. And it goes in agave cultivation. What's really cool lately, and it's kind of a new thing maybe in the last 10 years, is with the onset of LiDAR, radar, and these large scale satellite and flyby imagery, as they're starting to find these patterns of agave near the Hohokam, which is what dates back, God, I should know this, like 10,000 years seems like a long time, but it's over 1,000 years. And so what they're finding, all these new species they're all near former Hohokam settlements. And Wendy Hodgins is the person that's really looking at this, but they're essentially new, old domestic species. So there's a lot of new species coming online. And you can tell I don't know how they got at this, but they say they're sweeter, and they've bred the sexual reproduction out of them, so they can't get seeds. It's rare to see them seed, so they only reproduce asexually. So this has been going on for quite a while. Also, I've collected a bunch of information on that, but I haven't summarized it. But all the way up to Navajo and Apache, there would be either trips to collect distilled spirits, or there'd be trips to collect agave. And before that, there was that also for just the agave before distillation.
So a very important question which we glossed over earlier is people are curious where they can buy Mazot and Batuk.
Distribution is rare. I was just expanding. It depends on what state you're in. I was literally just expanding into Oregon and California. So only in Arizona, Oregon, and California at the moment. And so with this new economic reality, and I was focused on boutique liquor stores and restaurant bars. And I hate saying it, but I think I'm expecting a lot of people not to make it. I'm hoping I'm one of the ones that make it. But I'm now looking for larger retail outlets with online. And I've just waited. I'll be starting that. I've been doing a little bit of the research, and I've been waiting for a steady state before the panic and the crisis stage set in. So because right now, the biggest problem is, even with my people that sell a lot here in Tucson that know me well, they're not taking on any new products. So that's going to be a problem.
Are you selling through Old Town in San Diego?
No, I sent him a message once just to see what would happen, and he never did. And I was going to go to your San Diego mezcal or Mexican bottle. Yeah, there was something that came up I had to be in Mexico the same. Oh no, I gave a presentation in Ajo, so I'm here. I was prioritizing a town of 1,400 people, but there's some important things going on in the town of Ajo. It's definitely a cross-border area.
Shad would like to know where Ajo is.
Where is Ajo? Ajo is, if you're driving from Phoenix to Rocky Point or Puerto Penasco, which is the big Cia Cortez destination closest to Tucson and Phoenix, you'll go right through Ajo, and it's not that far from the border. So it's in between Yuma. It's also in between Yuma and Tucson. About partway, it's an old Phelps Dodge community. When the mining companies would build all the hospitals, they build the schools, they build the houses. So it's pretty cool. So it's hit bottom economically. It was sad to see, but now it's rising. There's some cool people moving in. And if you get it, we're actually, one reason I'm going there is if we ever get back to normal, and so we're thinking of doing a Borderland Heritage Festival there. because they have a tri-national Borderlands conference there that celebrates the Sonoran Desert, and they get the Tohono O'odham. That's why I don't call Sonorants a binational, it's a multinational. You get the Tohono O'odham, have territory on both sides of the border, Yaquis, Pimas, also are on both sides of the border. So Ajo is a cool place. It's up and coming. Go there. So we want to, yeah, one of my goals is both in Mexico is rural economic stimulus, sustainable tourism, things like that. And the same with border towns. See if we can get some little festivals in these border towns in Arizona that, yeah, we don't need to stimulate downtown Tucson's economy anymore. Well, there's people today that will argue with that. I think we need to stimulate everybody's economy.
So Michael, I'm soliciting the last set of questions if people have them from our audience. And I'm, if you want to continue for just, a few more minutes, if you have something to sum up. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the cultural aspect of this a bit more, but as I solicit questions, do you want to, like work through your concluding statement idea there?
Yeah, I'm still working on this. I thought I had it down, but I don't. I'm treading, like I say, a weird path because I get along with everybody. I like everybody. So I want to I've got 2 slides I've been working on, and I'll try to go back and forth, and I'll just talk about, and I want people to think about this. So we have another one of these, or maybe we can co-write up a little blog or article about it. But what are the social economic barriers to sustainability, or even and especially the cultural and social and both economic? And in this one, I'll focus. I mean, there's a whole lot of aspects of this I haven't even thought of, but the one thing we're all looking at in Mezcal and Bacanora is the rapid growth of commercial brands or commercial usadores. And the stereotype, and it's not entirely true, but wealthy urban, but definitely urban versus traditional rural producers. As far as social economic sustainability, where's the money go? Just ask, where's the money go and where do you want it to go? And these people I guess a lot of them are mixers. I wish I could have found that photograph. So here's one in 2005 when the Gnome was set up. Someone from Hermosillo, and I won't say who, but came to Bacanora, built this really nice building and left. And nobody's been there. And that's only so he can say his Bacanora is from Bacanora, Sonora. So it was built in the town of Bacanora, and I've got a picture of it. So this gets at the idea of transparency, and I have some ideas for transparency. Is you need information, and you can't have information. Nobody has enough information. So how do we get that information out there? Information is needed to make decisions on. And I think also in that first slide, I had an idea of on commodities is it just tastes good enough? There's a market for everything. There's a niche in a market for everything. And is just having something that tastes good enough, like a good wine, a 95 rated wine, or is there a quality aspect that goes beyond taste? And I think, I can't remember the words I use, but I think identity and something else. So we have to, for those people that are concerned about sustainability, and I hope more than biological sustainability, can we get certifications on this, like family owned, you can get BAT certificate. We're trying to get BAT certifications. There's a couple of tequilas that are BAT certified. They've been trying to do it in Bacanora, but it takes money to monitor. So you can get a BAT certification, which is a type of biological certification. You could get a a sustainable growth certification? Why can't you get a traditional Bacanora producing family certification or something along those lines? And just so people can make decisions. Say,
So to that point, Jared Hedrick is asking, what would you say is the biggest cultural identity and differentiation from other agave distillates? Just in a sense, he's asking if he has to relay this to new drinkers that aren't in the know, how do you describe that to them? Why is Bacanora different? How is it different?
Well, I think it's coming from a whole different social ecosystem development. So, it's a desert agave. We can look at technical things. It's a desert agave. It's a Sonoran desert, mainly a Sonoran desert plant. People argue with you with Alamos in the southern regions, but it's also just, this is the problem with culture. I'm here, I'm embedded in this culture. I've been here off and on for decades. So when you ask me these questions, it's hard for me. I mean, even questions like, Tucson's so different. Can you explain this? It's hard to explain culture. And so it's embedded in this culture. And, but why to drink Bacanora over Mezcal? That's a tough one, something new.
Oh, I don't know that it's necessarily that like that. I think
the identity is real strong. I don't know if I told you that story, but remember the guy standing by the agave, Rafael Encinas Molina, Batuque? He had a lot of, I didn't realize it, but he was the last person I approached to import. And I didn't realize at the time, but there was 2 or 3 other people courting him. And I have to go see things. I have to know the context. So we went up to the ranch. We went to the community, had lunch with his sister. And on the drive down, he just goes, okay, you're the guy. All these other guys never went to see the agave. You went to see the agave. These other guys are only interested in the bottle. You're interested in us, and that there's a huge pride in this thing. I mean, it's medicine. I mean, people drink it for breakfast every morning. It's embedded in the culture, like it is everywhere, Sotol and Mezcal. But that's why I'm getting at this. I want people to start thinking about this continuum of commodity versus culture, because a lot of these things are just commodity. My biggest beef right now is barreling Bacanora. It's not a tradition. In Chihuahua, there were people that came over the border to make whiskeys, and they may have made whiskey Sotol, and they barreled. But I haven't seen that in Bacanora. So it's not a tradition, it's not a part of the culture, but it's part of the gnome. And I think it's part of, and a lot of the commercial Isadores, the marketers, are doing the full Blanco, Reposado, Añejo. And I call it chasing the tequila trail. So they're interested in this. It is part of their history. There's going to be somebody in their family that is connected to Bacanora, probably multiple people, but it's a commercial product. It's a commodity product. It's there to make money. It's not there as and I won't say pride, it's just doesn't have the cultural integrity that comes from some of these traditional producers. And I don't know how to say that now. That's why I'm having so hard a time with these slides, this is really good because I've been able to articulate things in some of the early slides that I think are really good conceptual basis to start dealing with this. And am I just odd?
Yeah. Nope. There are a lot of obsessives in all these spaces.
Am I just militant? Because go up to that first slide that was commodity, liquid in a bottle. I'm not interested in selling bottles. I'm interested in you know, the people, the culture, and all that. And that's what I sell.
Liquid culture.
Yeah, liquid culture. I sell stories. You always got to tell a story.
And I mean, to Jared's question, I'm gonna, you know, as an outsider, I think one of the two things really pop out to me that Michael's talked about a little bit. One is the ranching culture. When I met the distillers that he works with, you know, they're blue jean wearing, cowboy boot wearing, they have big belt buckles. They have a very different sensibility about them. You know, it's very much more vaquero cowboy culture. I just, you know, I not only got that vibe, but that's what they started talking to me about, horses and things like that. And the other thing that he keeps trying to describe or put a point on, which I led with in my introduction because it is quite fascinating, is this cross-border identity that, you know, that everybody does have extended families that live across the border. They talk about traveling back and forth across the border. They all drove up to Tucson from Bacanora, which I mapped on Google Maps, and it's just a hellacious amount of time. But for them, it's normal. They drive large distances across the border in the border region.
Oh yeah,
And there are a lot of, huh?
The West is five hours to get anywhere in Arizona. Almost.
Yeah,
Or 2 hours minimum.
but it's this ineffable thing that you know, we probably should work at describing a lot better, because it's fascinating to encounter in person. One other question, Michael. You mentioned aged Bacanora, and Kyle Thompson is curious about whether Reposado Bacaноras are perhaps a bit counter to the Bacanora tradition. Is that what you were saying, or, you know?
Well,
is that...
everybody has some. I was also, as a wine chemist for Pinot production in Oregon for a while. I've done a little bit of everything. So I became a Pinot snob, and barreling as an art, getting good whiskey, and I presume good tequila is an art. I don't think there's anybody in Sonora that knows that art. Everybody just has a wood barrel in their kitchen or outside on the sidewalk or the patio. So, and I think people are, there's a push-pull thing for the economics of this. They see other people making the reposado, so they start doing it and experimenting because people want to make money. And, you know, I purposely went with some people because they didn't do reposados, the Mazote people. And this is what I wish I had explained. So I bring in 3 products from the Chacon family, and they're 3 Bacanora products. And the other 2, which I didn't describe, is Uva Llama and Anisado. And these are traditional flavorings. So, or not traditional, but these are traditional. In fact, I drank a lot, not a lot, too much at times. Uva Llama lechuguilla, and it, you know, so those are the kind of things I'd rather focus on, these things that have cultural meaning. I mean, it's an intangible thing, and if we're going to market this, you're going to have an elevator spiel that you can just get it out. So one of my elevator spiels for this part of the country is Bacanora is Arizona's local mezcal. It's, you know, I tried all kinds of things and people just stared at me. but no, and this is, yeah, so, and we just had a conversation that somebody I really admire and actually promote their Bacanora is now doing barreling. And this is an example of the process of commodification. If somebody who is up there on the altar of cultural traditional Bacanora producers produces a commercial, a non-cultural commercial product, what does that do in the world of Bacanora on the commodity culture continuum? What it does is it legitimizes the people that are already doing it. So it gives them more cultural power, and it kind of buries, I don't know what the word is, but on the cultural traditional part, it makes it look less important culture, I guess. I don't know what to say.
No, I mean, that's
Getting my point
actually,
across. Yeah. And then what's going to happen? You're going to play follow the leader. We're the first person to get a palmilla out, a sotol from Sonora. And now there's a couple more people that are doing it. And so did I answer the question? What was the question?
yeah, no, I think you did actually quite a good job of delving into the cultural complexity. I mean,
And that's why I wanted you to think of this continuum of commodity to culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's all of them, everything has some property of both. And it's not a linear thing, it's a very complex network of things. But it's good to think of it on kind of a linear continuum. And then start looking at processes of commodification, because is it okay if mezcal becomes tequila or whiskey, and certain people just want certain types of whiskeys or something like that? When I go to California and I go to a bar that's really got a really good reputation, and someone says, "Oh, Bacanora, let me look at that one," and they bring out one that my producers would just lose respect for them for having, because we know who makes it and what the history is. Not that it's not bad tasting, but so these are the questions. Is that where we're going? I mean, and if we can do something, and also consumers need to make decisions, and so you have to give them the information to make that decision. I mean, the invisible hand, economic theory of the invisible hand, is you need perfect information. I mean, that's a huge economic theory. And if a lot of you guys, the information, you just know it. I don't. I just gave up trying to follow mezcal. It was too much information in my head. The key is, how do you give that to a consumer to make a decision within 5 minutes? How do you do
that is the tricky question.
Right.
We're almost out of time. So we have one question that actually brings it back to where you started and where you are. Kyle Thompson is asking, he says, I see the Arizona-Sonora border region exactly how Mike describes. What are the other Bacanora connections on the Arizona side? There does not appear to be that deep tradition of Bacanora mezcal production in Arizona.
Right now.
Well, I mean, part of the answer maybe is that it's historical. So
it's a historical, and that's one thing I think. I've talked to a rancher. He says there's roasting pits all over his ranch. It's illegal, and there's people that do it in their backyard. A lot of people do it in their backyard here. And it's lechuguillas and Bacanora. We don't have angustifolia that I know of. There's probably some little slot canyons that don't get freezes that have populations here, but Tohono O'odham, from what I've heard, that are right on the border, just southeast of Tucson. I haven't ran into anybody yet, but I've heard they do make Bacanora there. But no, I think Prohibition wiped out a lot of stuff like that.
Okay. Right. Any closing words before we shut things down here?
No, if anybody has any ideas, I mean, get a hold of me by email or Instagram, or any comments or what would improve this, or any questions. And because I really think I'd really like to work with this model, this idea of cultural sustainability as an integrated sustainability. And I think that's really important. We have to, because there's such a mindset. In the last presentation I gave, there was someone in the room that was a conservationist, and they're just going, and I presented it not quite like this, but they're just going, it's not sustainable, it's not sustainable, it's not sustainable. And I go, well, what type of sustainable? And they couldn't grasp the idea of social, economic, or cultural being part of that. So we have to also get that in people's heads. And this idea of commodification, or maybe I should just start selling vodka. I don't know. I mean, is there a difference? It is to me.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. This has been really illuminating. You're being thanked by people here in the chat room who are asking if they can really reach out via email, and yes, you can. If anybody has any trouble getting a hold of him, you can also email Susan or myself.
Yeah, I'm at, I should have put that up in front. I'm at MH, M as in Mike, H as in Hurley, at borderlandspirits.com.
Yeah, I just sent that out to everybody.
Me too.
Yeah, great.
I mean, we're getting into these questions in Tucson quite a bit with the Agave Heritage Festival. What's heritage?
Yep.
Who should be invited? And there's a really gray area, but there wasn't, there hasn't been a lot. But the Tucson Agave Heritage Festival started out with this group of guys like Gary Nahman and Doug Doug Smith and some other people that aren't, not Todd Handley, but anyway, they wanted an excuse to drink. So it really became a tequila festival that started out like 20 years ago. So it's morphed into this idea of heritage because Tucson became a UNESCO gastronomy site. So
Great. I'll take this second to just put a plug in. I had a very great time at the Agave Heritage Festival in Tucson last year. Unfortunately, it's not happening this year.
Nope. Wait, hold on. It just has been postponed until the beginning half of September. So that is where it's at now.
Okay, we will see if that happens.
There's a bunch of emails floating around to do some things online, like do a festival tasting or something like that, which I've been thinking of suggesting to them. But this whole health economic crisis really put me on my heels. I'm used to blasting through almost anything. Give me malaria and I'm out for 3 days and I'm back to work. This one's, I can't quite get my head wrapped around it of whether I should just dig a hole and hide or keep doing what I'm doing.
Do what you're doing. There's going to be an end. We've got to be here on the other side, and we all need to be drinking some pretty delicious Bacanora. But I have to, sadly, I have to bring this to a close because we're about to lose our connection in 2 minutes here on Zoom.
Okay.
So Michael, we look forward to continuing the conversation, having you at Mexico in a Bottle. For everyone else still on the call here, we've been recording it and we will be sending out the link in the next couple of days. And I greatly appreciate you being here. And next week on Monday, we will be talking to Raza Zaidi of Oaxaca Mezcal and Back Alley Imports. And he is going to be diving into the topic of pulque and a new product that he has been working on called Huerte, which is a distilled pulque. So you will get the link. In fact, the link is the same for today's call as it will be for next week. So again, thank you all. Thank you, Max, for joining us.
And I didn't start out with what I really like to thank you guys in public for putting all this together and putting me in contact with other people like me. It's a really good thing to do, and I'll be in contact with you about maybe we should set up this little small scale importers group to figure out how to survive.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yep. All right. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. How